Well, here we are again on another episode of Retro Game Hunting. Here I am about 60 miles away from the last store that I visited, but this is part of the same franchise, so you're going to see a lot of the same price stickers as in the previous store. And here as I walked in, I got a good look at the selection of Sega CD and Sega Saturn games right next to the Sega Dreamcast. I didn't really see anything too remarkable here, except for I did notice that they had Night Trap loose for $24.99. Since this was just released for the Nintendo Switch, I figured I'd pass on it. But yeah, they have a selection of Sega Dreamcast games here that didn't really catch a lot of my attention. I do like Virtua Tennis, though. However, I already own it, so I had to move on from this selection. They did have quite a selection of PS1 games, but as you look here, there's a lot of sports titles and game show offerings and racing games, but nothing really too unique that I'm actually looking for, except for when I looked up at the top shelf here. Digging through this stack, I just happened to see Oddworld Abe's Odyssey. I decided to go ahead and grab this, as this was also on the PlayStation Classic. I think eventually I'll try to show a comparison between the original hardware and the PlayStation Classic at some point, but this copy of Lethal Enforcers 1 and 2 also caught my eye. I already have the Konami Justifier pistols, so this would actually be a good purchase for me, but I would have rather it came with the original artwork, so I had to debate this for a little bit. This copy of Duke Nukem: A Time to Kill also caught my attention. I like collecting these for the PlayStation because they're a lot easier to get going than the original PC versions. And it came complete in box, so I decided to go ahead and grab it. Another game that's not too hard to find but I didn't yet own in my collection was Driver 2. This game was groundbreaking when it was released, or rather the first one was. It was kind of like playing through an action movie, and that was at a time where that wasn't really very common. Again, complete in box with the manual, I will definitely take that one. There weren't too many other games that were worthy of note, a lot more sports games, but then I came across these long box PS1 games. I don't own too many of these because I don't really have the room for them on my shelf, but this Shell Shock game looked very interesting. I decided to pass on it ultimately because it looked like I had water damage on the cardboard, and I assumed that was just going to keep spreading. It also didn't come with a manual, so I decided to save my money until I find it complete. PGA Tour 96 also caught my eye, but the case was cracked, and again, I really don't want to collect a lot of these games because I don't really have the room to store them. Although sometimes if I can find throwaway games like these in a case that's complete, I will buy them because I can salvage the case on a game that really does matter to me. I also found a copy of Grand Theft Auto 2. Even though I'm not a fan of the 2D Grand Theft Auto games, I decided to go ahead and get it. Maybe I'll like this one better than the first one. And I'd never seen this game before, but I decided to pick it up. It's Pitfall 3D Beyond the Jungle. I like how part of the advertisement for this game is that it includes the Atari 2600 version. And I often find wrestling games very nostalgic from this time period because wrestling was kinda huge, at least in my area, in the late 1990s. Though I will say I remember seeing more people wearing WCW shirts than I saw them wearing something from WWF. I initially wasn't going to get this game because I saw the price was a tad bit higher than I was willing to pay for it, but then I noticed it's compatible with the multi-tap, and I think I'm willing to try that out sometime. I was initially interested in this copy of One Extreme, but then I noticed that the case is not actually a clear jewel case because it has that black background around the disc, so I decided to pass on it. This copy of Demolition Racer caught my eye only because it's the spiritual successor to Destruction Derby 2. I'm interested to see how the gameplay is on this one. This copy of Thunderstrike 2 also caught my attention, but I decided against it because the front of the case was cracked and the back of the case was sun-faded. I honestly think that's because this game shelf actually faces towards a giant window, so I actually think that the sun fading is a result of it being in this store. Alright, but moving back to more of the retro-style games that I'm used to, I walked past the DVD sets and a few of these consoles. I just happened to notice that they had some arcade fighting sticks in here, as well as the 4-person multi-tap for the Sony PlayStation for $2.99, and some sort of virtual golf game for the PlayStation 2 that uses its own controller. I'm not sure what that's all about. Now here's a spot that took me a while to look through. I had to actually see how many of these games I already had, and it turns out I had a lot of them. The downside to looking at these games behind a case is that I can't see how they're priced. I really miss the time when these were arbitrarily labeled at 99 cents each, or they were just sitting out in a bin that you could rummage through and find the games that you want. Right next to the Atari 2600 games were some NES games. Of course, they had the most popular games on top, such as Battletoads, Double Dragon, Donkey Kong, Mario Bros., Metroid, Batman, Final Fantasy, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! And then on the second shelf, just below those, you can see the games that maybe aren't in demand, but maybe a little bit more popular than the average game. And then on the bottom shelf, they had pretty much the games nobody's going to look for. They're just, I guess, there for filler? I don't know. Next to that, they had some Xbox One consoles. And then on the other side of that, they had a whole bunch of Game Boy Advance games, Game Boy games, and Game Boy Color games. I actually stopped collecting these as much as I used to because they're hard to track and they're hard to shop for, especially when they're all behind these cases. Moving a bit further down the aisle, we can see a couple of GameCubes, an NES Classic Edition, and an Atari 2600 Junior sitting on top of what looks like a clone Atari 2600. I also remember being interested in that Genesis 3, but what really caught my eye was this Nomad. Right behind it you can see that it came with all the hookups, but it didn't have the battery compartment, and that was a deal breaker for me, especially at the price they were asking for it. I most likely will never play it with batteries because it actually sucks them dry pretty quickly, but if I were to try to order that battery compartment separately, it would cost me about $50. I tried talking to the manager, who actually called the store owner, to try to haggle on the price a little bit, but they wouldn't budge and they were pretty firm, so unfortunately I had to walk away from this one. That was particularly hard because this is the first time I've ever come across a Sega Nomad in the wild, and I most likely will never come across another one again. In the next case, they have some more rare and obscure games, such as 3D Tetris, and I think that price was a little high even when I saw it there. They had a copy of Cybermorph for the Atari Jaguar, but they had long since sold the console for it, so I was incredibly disappointed to have missed that. Game Gear titles are kind of a double-edged sword for me because I do like collecting them, but I have no way of capturing game footage for them. The offerings for the Nintendo 64 were the standard fare, a lot of sports titles and a few here and there that had I not already owned them I would have been interested. They did have a good offering of Super Nintendo games though. The two games that caught my eye out of here were Zombies Ate My Neighbors and Kirby's Dream Land 3. However, I did end up passing on those two because I just can't afford to spend that much on games when I'm also trying to collect consoles as well. There was also a pretty big selection of Xbox games here, but I've kind of already collected the games that I think I want for that system, and I'm really just looking for games that are backwards compatible with the Xbox One, and nothing here caught my eye. Looking at the selection for PlayStation 2 games, the first game that caught my eye was Haven Call of the King. I actually hadn't even heard of this game until about a week before. I ended up getting it because it was created by Traveler's Tales. And at the time, I had been watching a lot of content from the founder of Traveler's Tales on Game Hunt. I'm very curious to see what this game is going to be like. And oh man, this game really takes me back. I remember playing Tribes a lot in Computer Club and LAN parties on PC. I don't think I've ever played it on PlayStation 2. This game says it can work across the network adapter, but I think it required broadband for you to connect to other players, so I don't think this is active anymore. I did look through the instruction manual to see if they made specific mentions about this, but it wasn't really clear whether or not you can play this without internet. If I'm mistaken about that, please let me know in the comments. The organization of this store actually has me a little bit in awe. Again, I'm used to seeing these games all scattered around and not really in any particular order. While scanning for other games that could be networked, I came across Half-Life 2. Even though it doesn't come with the original artwork, I decided to go ahead and grab this because I don't really come across it too often, and I'm not really too much of a stickler on the artwork as long as it has something I can see on the shelf. I also decided to grab another copy of Killzone because I think that brings me up to 4 for this game. I did find a copy of Kingdom Hearts 2, but again it was missing the manual, so I don't think I needed to pick this one up. While I was at the counter waiting for the manager to get back to me on whether or not they were going to budge on the price of the Sega Nomad, I actually noticed the Sega Genesis case right behind it that I hadn't noticed before. They did have a copy of Virtua Fighter for the 32X as well, but I already had it. And here's where I found the motherlode of Atari 7800 games. I found these just in time for my review on the Atari 7800. I ended up getting a whole bunch of these, and they were all reasonably priced. They also had a decent offering for the Intellivision and Magnavox Odyssey 2. However, my Magnavox Odyssey 2 already came with most of the games for it, and a lot of these Intellivision games I already had for 99 cents each, and they were asking for more than that here. Still, this is something I don't come across too often, and I was pleased to see this in a store. And then I saw it, one of the games I've been looking for quite a while for the Sega Genesis, and that is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Hyperstone Heist. I also ended up grabbing a copy of Lethal Enforcers on the cartridge, as well as Streets of Rage 3, and until I started looking through this footage, I actually forgot to have them grab Fatal Labyrinth, so I guess I'll have to find that some other time. Now this was supposed to be the end of my trip, but I actually, through listening to a conversation from the store manager in there, he actually directed someone to another one that is just on the other side of town. So I'm going to drive down there real quick, and I'm going to take a look at this other store, and maybe we'll find something different. When I looked them up online, I found a lot of consoles and 8-bit computers and stuff that has, I've definitely been looking for but haven't been able to find. Hopefully they're priced well, and hopefully they have them still. So let's go ahead and head down there and we'll take a look. If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Also, if you enjoy the content of this channel, please remember to click on this subscribe button. Again, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.